just bringing it forward then to the present day, as I say, it's the 20th edition of the Six Nations. There's been a lot of hype about this Six Nations, mainly because we have the World Cup looming in whatever it is, 8 months or so. Is that hype justified in terms of we've got three of the 4 top teams in the world are European teams? We could probably see any one of 5 teams beating another one on the day. Is it potentially the best Six Nations we've had?
Yeah, I think so. I think the standard of rugby has been going up across the board. I think, as you've said, you look at the Six Nations this year, you could have potentially 3 or 4 of the sides in it doing extremely well in the World Cup. Ireland have been, bolters for the last few years. Their seeding in World Rugby now is higher than ever before. England, a quality side, probably have lost a couple of games, but have had some injury problems. Guys coming back into that squad, and England, everyone I think would anticipate that they do very well in the World Cup as well. Scotland have been building, the Italians have been going well, the French have got quite a typically French squad that they've got some new faces in there, but you just don't know how they're going to go. They could really surprise anyone on their day, as you've said. So I think from the Six Nations point of view, it's super exciting in that it's going to be close. I think there'll be some upsets, and hopefully it leads into a really exciting World Cup.
Yeah, I agree, and the fact that Wales have got both Ireland and England at home, I think is a huge thing for them. They would have to fancy themselves at least turning one of them over. You've got England, Ireland away for England in the first game, which I think Ireland would probably want a couple more games just to get into the swing of it before they had what they would probably see as the biggest home challenge. So the way the fixtures have fallen actually adds to it. Not only have you got teams that can pick each other off, you've actually got teams that if they want to go and do a Grand Slam have to go and do it the hard way. I think the biggest challenge this is probably the biggest challenge of Joe Schmidt's career as the Ireland coach, and the reason is he's always been the number 2 coming through the number 2. Clearly Ireland are the best team in Europe at the moment, and that changes everything because, and I've experienced it with England when we got to number 1 in the world, suddenly you start going out, or the temptations to go out not to lose games because you're number 1 and you don't want people to come at you. It's very, very difficult to still force that pace, and that's why New Zealand have been so impressive over the years. What Ireland do have in their favour is Leinster have a number of players that have done that in Europe as the best team in Europe, and they've been able to regenerate. So the likes of Johnny Sexton will be hugely important to not let Ireland go into their shell. They have to still attack England. They can't just rely on the boring game plan. What I think John Mitchell's trying to do is trying a little bit like Australia did to England in '91. You've had all this success by being boring, and they changed their game plan in the final and lose to Australia. I think there's a little bit of those mind games in there.
So I just want to move on now to the World Cup, which obviously looming there, very big, coming up in September. If we cast our mind back 4 years, you may remember that last day of the 2015 Six Nations when there was an England-France match which was like 50-45. Ireland beat Scotland, again, similar sort of scoreline, and Wales beat Italy. It was a great, sensational final day of the Six Nations. We all got very excited about it, and then sure enough, whatever it was, 6-7 months later, not one European side in the World Cup semi-finals. Now, we're talking about 3 of the top 4 teams in the world being European sides. Have we really closed the gap on the Southern Hemisphere? And if so, how and why?
Yes, I genuinely believe we have. I think some of it is cyclical. So, Australia started sort of falling away, South Africa started falling away at the same time. Some of that will be down to player turnover and other various factors. As a result, the challenge for New Zealand isn't quite as tough as it was. So New Zealand come up to the Northern Hemisphere and have a couple of shocks in November. From a New Zealand perspective, it couldn't have happened at a better time for them because they will now know they're the best in the world at analysing. A good friend of ours works as their head analyst, Jamie Hamilton, who used to play with us at Leicester and then was the Leicester analyst. He went to New Zealand, and I spoke to him during the Lions, and the stuff they do is absolutely fantastic. But they will have gone away. Has anyone watched the Amazon Steve All Blacks documentary? It's well worth a watch, a series of documentaries. I know it's sort of slightly polished for what's released, but just to see how Steve Hansen deals with failure and after the Lions tour and where he brought them all together and said, "You lot think you're better than you are, and we need to sort." You can just imagine what they were saying when they got home from this trip, and there is absolutely no danger of them walking in with blindfolds on. But I'd certainly think, particularly because Ireland have led the way up here and dragged the other teams with them, that the Northern Hemisphere has definitely caught up, and we've seen that with some of the performances.
Yeah, I think the gap is closed. I think Australian rugby is probably not as strong as it was. They're suffering internally, and that's publicly been talked about down there. South African rugby seems to have, was probably dipped a little bit, but it's actually sort of seemed to be strengthening at the minute. And New Zealand rugby's probably suffered as a result of playing against those sides. I think the domestic competition up here has been really, really tough. The European rugby has been, definitely probably the best domestic competition in the world. It's probably more entertaining to watch, in my opinion, than Super Rugby is now. The games are proper games of rugby where teams are getting stuck into each other and really going toe to toe for 80 minutes. And I think the gap is closing. I think New Zealand, as Benny said, are definitely the best side in the world at the minute, with the amount of players they have and the ability that they have to turn games, and they're hurting as well at the minute at probably the right time going into the World Cup. That's why I think they have to be favourites. But it is exciting in that the four or sort of three of the top four sides going into it seeded are Northern Hemisphere sides.
How significant a predictor will the Six Nations be of World Cup potential? Is it possible for teams to be at peak form twice in the same year, or should the Six Nations be seen as a building block towards Japan? We touched on it slightly. Is it Grand Slam means a great deal, we think?
I think it does, but equally, so that it depends where you are in your sort of planning stage, and Ireland are obviously right up there where they want to be, so they just want to continue that momentum, and so anything less than that isn't great. I think England are in the same place. I think Wales, if they didn't have a good Six Nations, it wouldn't be catastrophic to where they are. But I think if they had a good Six Nations, it would lift the confidence levels going in. So I think it's pretty important this year. It's not always, but I think this year it is.
Yeah, I think anybody would like to go into the World Cup on the back of a Grand Slam. It would give you huge confidence, huge belief in where you're going. I think particularly for Ireland that would be the case. In saying that, if you lose a couple of games as a coach, you're going to have to go, oh, don't worry about it, we're going to use it as a building block. So, I think it would be good to have a Grand Slam going into it. Yeah, you'd rather it be that way, but it's not the end of the world, I don't think.
Performance-wise is quite. Are you playing the style that you think is going to be important to win the World Cup? And if you're not, even if you're winning the games, it's still some tweaks to be made. And then I guess the other thing is, there is still a chance for some bolters to secure positions. So, Henshaw
but I think
could have a couple of great games at fullback.
In both sides in the opening round. I think both coaches have been inclined to go, well, you know what, we'll give Robbie Henshaw, because Jordan Lamore has played there and done a really good job, but we want to give Robbie Henshaw a start at fullback. The same with Elliot Daly. Guys, when you go to a World Cup with a 30-man squad, you might have 2 or 3 injuries and have to rotate and play different guys out of position. And I think you're seeing that in both sides at the beginning. They're sort of erring on the side of caution and going, you know what, Mike Brown probably is better aerially, but we're going to back Elliot Daly and see how he goes.
Next question is just for Jordan. Question about Ireland's pool stage group in the World Cup. Obviously, Ollie Foss thinks it's a straightforward group with Scotland and I think Samoa and Italy in there. I mean, if Ireland either win the group or finish second, they would, in all likelihood, play one of South Africa or New Zealand, which are not easy games. How do you think Joe Schmidt might approach that?
I think he'll want to win the group. I think he'll just want to go hell for leather at it. I think he's been rotating quite a lot of players over the last 2 seasons in the Six Nations. He's used a lot of different guys. The squad that he picks is going to be really interesting. But they'll want to win every game. They'll want to go out. They'll want to top the group, and they'll want to take it from there. I think obviously you'd probably prefer a quarter-final against South Africa than New Zealand, and I think that's what they'll be gunning for.